They'd tried to take it from him once. Just once. The shelter coordinator reached through the kennel bars, spoke softly, moved slowly, the way you approach a dog who's been hurt before. Bailey didn't growl, didn't snap, didn't show teeth. He just tightened his grip on the thing clenched between his jaws, and something in his eyes made her stop. Not fear, not defiance. Desperation. Whatever he was holding, it wasn't a toy anymore. It was the only thing keeping him alive. Subscribe to see what happens when a dog trusts an object more than people. Most dogs at the shelter performed. They had to. Tails wagged when people walked by, noses pressed against kennel gates, eyes locked on visitors, begging, pleading, pick me, choose me, take me home. Bailey didn't perform. He sat in the back corner of his kennel, body turned away from the hallway, holding something between his paws. Worn, gray, falling apart. Most people walked past without stopping. The ones who did stop asked the same questions. What is that? Can you take it away? Will he ever let it go? And when the staff said no, that Bailey had been holding it for 3 months, that 2 families had already returned him because of it, that he wouldn't eat or sleep or move without it, those people left, because a dog who wouldn't let go felt broken, and broken things required work most people didn't want to do. Bailey had been at the shelter for 92 days, long enough that his kennel card had been moved to the back hallway, long enough that staff stopped talking about him in hopeful tones, long enough that everyone knew what happened to dogs who stayed too long. He wasn't aggressive, wasn't sick, wasn't dangerous. He was just unreachable. And the object he held, the thing no one could identify anymore, was the wall between him and the world. Until the day someone finally asked a different question. Not, can you take it away, but why does it matter so much? Claire wasn't looking for a project. She'd told Karen that the moment they walked into the shelter. Clear boundaries, realistic expectations. They wanted a companion, not a rehabilitation case. We're first-time dog owners, she'd said. We want to do this right. Karen had nodded, pulled up profiles. Young dogs, healthy dogs, dogs with clean medical histories and easy temperaments. They met 4 that morning, all of them perfect, all of them exactly what Claire and David said they wanted. But Claire kept hearing something. Not a sound, the opposite of sound. Silence, coming from the back hallway. What's down there? She asked. Karen hesitated. Long-term residents. Can we see them? I wouldn't recommend it for first-time adopters. Claire looked at David. He shrugged. They followed Karen down the corridor, past the kennels where dogs barked and jumped and performed, past the ones where volunteers stood ready with backstories and success statistics, to the back section, where hope went quiet. Bailey's kennel was 3rd from the end. Claire saw him before Karen could point him out. He wasn't moving, wasn't barking, wasn't looking at them. He sat in the corner, body angled toward the wall, holding something between his front paws. Something gray, worn, unrecognizable. His jaw was clenched around it, his whole body curved protectively over it, like someone was about to take it away. Claire stopped walking. What's his name? Karen pulled out her phone. Bailey, golden retriever, 4 years old. Owner surrender 3 months ago. What's he holding? We're not sure. Some kind of stuffed animal. It came with him. David stepped closer to the kennel. Does he ever put it down? No. Ever? Ever. Claire crouched down, tried to see Bailey's face. He wouldn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the wall. His breathing was shallow, fast, the kind of breathing that comes from waiting for something bad to happen. Bailey? Claire said softly. Nothing. Not even an ear twitch. Has anyone adopted him? David asked. Karen's expression changed. 2 families tried. What happened? The first family wanted him to leave the toy here, thought it would help him adjust. He stopped eating, stopped moving. They brought him back after 4 days. Claire's chest tightened. And the second family? They kept the toy, but Bailey wouldn't engage, wouldn't play, wouldn't do anything except sit in corners holding it. They said living with a dog like that was— She trailed off. Was what? Too hard. David looked at Bailey, at the way he held that object, at the way his whole body seemed built around protecting it. What happens if no one takes him? Karen didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was softer. We're a limited intake shelter. He's been here 92 days. We've extended his timeline twice, but we can't keep him indefinitely. How long does he have? A month, maybe less. The hallway was quiet except for distant sounds, dogs barking, gates clanging, families laughing, life continuing. Bailey sat perfectly still, waiting for nothing. Can we meet him? Claire asked. It used to be a stuffed animal. The intake form said so, though the description was vague. Plush toy, species unknown, moderate wear. Now it was something else entirely. The fabric had faded to mottled gray, seams split in places, stuffing poking through. Whatever shape it once held, bear, dog, rabbit, was gone, compressed by months, maybe years of constant pressure. There were no identifying features left. No eyes, no nose, no tags. Just fabric and stuffing and the faint smell of something the staff couldn't place. Memory. The object had arrived with Bailey. The intake notes were brief. Owner surrender, personal item included. Dog refuses separation from object. Do not remove. No explanation, no context, just the warning, underlined twice. Karen had processed Bailey's intake. She remembered it clearly, not because Bailey had been aggressive or distressed, but because he'd been so utterly still. Most surrendered dogs came in anxious, panting, looking for their owners. Bailey had walked into the shelter like he'd expected it. He hadn't pulled on the leash, hadn't whined, hadn't looked back. He just walked into the kennel, sat down in the corner, and placed the object carefully between his paws. And that's where it stayed. The shelter tried to clean it once. A new volunteer noticed the object, thought she was helping, reached in while Bailey was outside for his walk, planning to wash it. When Bailey returned and saw it missing, he froze in the kennel doorway, not barking, not searching, just frozen. His body went rigid, his breathing turned shallow, his eyes went wide. The volunteer rushed to retrieve it, brought it back unwashed. Bailey walked to it slowly, picked it up with a gentleness that bordered on reverence, returned to his corner. Didn't move for 6 hours. After that, the staff left it alone. They didn't understand it. Most found it unsettling, the way Bailey held it, never playing, never tossing it, never treating it like a toy. He just held it, protected it, carried it like a responsibility. Jenny, the volunteer who spent the most time trying to reach him, had a theory. It's not a toy, she'd said once. It's a person. Karen had waited for more. Not literally, but it represents someone who mattered. Holding on to it is the only way he knows how to hold on to them. Karen hadn't disagreed, because the alternative, that it was just a toy, just an object, didn't explain the look in Bailey's eyes when he held it. Toys didn't inspire that kind of devotion. People did. And whatever person that object represented, whoever had given it to Bailey or been connected to it, they were gone now. The object was all that was left. So Bailey held on, not because he was stubborn, but because letting go would mean accepting that the person was really gone, and he wasn't ready to do that. Maybe he never would be. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Liability waivers, medical records, behavioral contracts, a document Claire and David had to initial stating they understood Bailey's history and the likelihood that his attachment to the object might never change. Karen watched them sign each page. You could still change your mind. They didn't. When the paperwork was finished, Karen stood. I'll get him ready. She disappeared down the hallway. Claire and David waited in the lobby, surrounded by the sounds of a shelter in motion. Dogs barking, families asking questions, volunteers leading new arrivals through intake. This was supposed to be a celebration. Most adoptions were. But when Karen returned with Bailey, there was no photographer waiting, no banner, no staff gathered to cheer, just a quiet walk toward the exit. Bailey moved slowly, the lead loose in Karen's hand. The object was clenched carefully in his jaw. He'd adjusted his grip before leaving the kennel, making sure it was secure. He didn't look at Claire and David as he passed them, didn't wag his tail, didn't show any sign that he understood what was happening. He just walked, one foot in front of the other, eyes on the ground. They walked through the shelter doors into the parking lot. Bailey squinted in the sunlight but didn't stop moving. At the car, David opened the back door. A bed was already laid out, soft, clean, bought specifically for this moment. Bailey stared into the car like it was another cage. Claire didn't rush him. Take your time. David gently guided him into the car. Bailey stepped up carefully, settled onto the bed, and immediately repositioned himself in the far corner. The object was still clenched in his jaw. Claire closed the door softly. They stood there for a moment, looking through the window at Bailey, pressed into the corner, head low, toy secure. This doesn't feel like a rescue, David said quietly. Claire's throat tightened. I know. He doesn't look happy. He doesn't look relieved. He just looks resigned. He's been through this before, 3 times, and every time it didn't last. Why would he believe this time is different? David leaned against the car. So what do? We prove it. They got into the car. David started the engine. Bailey didn't react. He'd been in cars before, been driven to new places that promised safety and delivered disappointment. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Claire glanced back. Bailey was staring out the window, but not at the passing scenery, at nothing. His eyes unfocused, his body still, the object pressed against his chest like a shield. There was no tail wagging, no excitement, no relief, just a dog going through the motions he'd been through before, waiting to see how long this home would become another memory. No one posted about the adoption on social media. No one took photos. No one called friends to share the good news, because it didn't feel like good news yet. It felt like the beginning of something uncertain, a promise that hadn't been proven. They'd prepared the house carefully, cleared a space in the living room corner, away from foot traffic, away from windows, away from anything that might feel like exposure. A bed, a water bowl, space that was his and only his. When they arrived home, Bailey didn't wait to be invited out of the car. He stood when David opened the door, the object still clenched in his jaw, and stepped down carefully. Inside, he stopped in the entryway, didn't move forward, didn't explore. Just stood there, looking at the space the way someone looks at a cell, calculating exits, measuring distances, deciding where the safest corner was. This is home, Claire said gently, unclipping the lead. Bailey walked directly to the corner they'd prepared, lay down, placed the object carefully between his front paws, and didn't move. David set a bowl of food nearby. Bailey, food. Bailey didn't look at it. They gave him space, moved through the house quietly, but every few minutes one of them would glance toward the corner. Bailey hadn't shifted position, hadn't touched the food, hadn't even lifted his head. An hour passed. Claire crouched a few feet away from him. Hey, buddy, you're safe here. I know you don't believe that yet, but you are. No response. By evening, the food was still untouched. Night came. They carried his bed upstairs. Bailey followed with his eyes, but didn't move until David gently guided him up. Once in the bedroom, Bailey went directly to his bed in the far corner, circled once, and lay down. Same position, same object clenched between his teeth. Claire and David got ready for bed in silence. When they turned off the lights, the room felt heavier than it should. In the darkness, they could hear him breathing, slow, controlled. Not the breath of sleep, the breath of someone waiting. "Do you think he knows we're trying?" Claire whispered. David was quiet. "I don't think he cares." It wasn't cruel, just honest. She stared at the ceiling. What if this is it? What if this is as good as it gets? Then we deal with it. But what if he's miserable? David exhaled slowly. He's safe. He has food, water, a bed. No one's going to take the toy away. That's more than he had. But he doesn't know that. Not yet, maybe not ever, but we do. Around 2 in the morning, Claire woke to a sound. Movement. She stayed still, listening. Bailey had shifted, and then she heard it. Drinking. He was drinking from the water bowl they'd left near his bed. She didn't move, didn't turn on the light, but something loosened in her chest. Not hope, not relief, just recognition that he'd made a choice. When morning came, the food bowl was still full, but the water bowl was empty. Claire refilled it without comment, set it down, walked away. Bailey watched her this time, just for a second, then looked away. It wasn't trust, it wasn't connection, but it was the first time he'd looked at her and seen something other than a threat. Day 7 felt like progress. Bailey was eating, small amounts, only when they left the room, but eating. The food disappeared in careful increments, as if he was rationing trust the same way he rationed calories. He drank more consistently, walked when leashed, still carried the toy everywhere, still kept his head down, but the trembling had lessened. Claire started to believe they were turning a corner. That morning she was making breakfast, pan on the stove, Bailey in the living room existing quietly in his corner. She reached for the spatula. Her elbow caught the pan handle. The pan fell. Metal hit tile with a sound like a gunshot. The crash echoed through the entire apartment. For a split second, there was silence. Then, scrambling, frantic, nails scratching against hardwood. "Bailey!" Claire started, but he was already gone. She ran to the living room. He wasn't there, wasn't by the couch, wasn't in his usual corner. Then she saw him. Under the couch, wedged as far back as he could get, pressed against the wall, body rigid, eyes huge. He was panting so hard she thought he might choke. The toy was clamped in his mouth so tight his jaw was trembling. "Bailey, I'm sorry," Claire said, dropping to her knees. "It was an accident. I just dropped a pan, that's all." He wasn't hearing her. His eyes were somewhere else, somewhere dark, somewhere she couldn't reach. He was back there, wherever there was. She lay down on the floor, tried to see him better. His whole body was shaking, not just trembling, full convulsions. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe, I promise." But he didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. All that progress, the mornings he'd sat a little closer, the moments he'd watched her without flinching, it was gone, erased, like it never happened. Hours passed. Claire sat on the floor a few feet from the couch, waiting. The sun moved across the room, morning turned to afternoon. Bailey didn't come out, didn't move, just kept panting, kept shaking. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't going to be a straight line. Healing wasn't going to happen in neat little steps where every day was better than the last. Some days Bailey would trust her. Some days he wouldn't. Some days he'd sit near her. Some days he'd hide. Some days he'd believe she wasn't going to hurt him. And some days, like today, he'd forget. She took a deep breath. "I'm still here," she said quietly. "Even when you're scared, even when you don't trust me, I'm still here." Bailey's eyes shifted, just for a second, like maybe he'd heard. But he didn't come out, and Claire didn't expect him to, because this was going to take time, more time than she thought, more patience than she knew she had. But she'd made a promise, and she was keeping it. even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. Day 10. Claire was on the couch, reading. David was at the kitchen table, working on his laptop. Bailey was in his corner across the room, lying on his bed, the object between his paws, eyes half closed. The house was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and keys clicking. And then, without warning, Bailey stood. Claire glanced up instinctively, expecting him to walk to his water bowl or shift positions. He didn't. He walked slowly across the room, stopped 6 feet from the couch. His eyes weren't on Claire. They were on the empty space beside the couch, a patch of carpet that caught the lamplight. He stood there for a long moment, calculating, deciding. Then he lay down. Not on the couch, not touching Claire, not asking for anything, just near. Claire's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't risk breaking whatever fragile thing had just happened. She kept her eyes on her book, though she wasn't reading anymore. Every part of her awareness was focused on the dog lying 3 feet away, close enough to hear her breathe, far enough to retreat if he changed his mind. The object was still clenched in his jaw. David noticed from the kitchen, met Claire's eyes across the room. She shook her head slightly. "Don't say anything." He didn't. Minutes passed, then an hour. Bailey stayed. His breathing slowed, deepened. Not the shallow, controlled breath of someone on guard. Something closer to rest. Claire's hand shook slightly as she turned a page. She wanted to reach down, to touch him, to acknowledge what he'd just done. But she knew better. This wasn't about her. This was about Bailey choosing, for the first time since they'd brought him home, not to be alone. When David stood to go to bed an hour later, he moved carefully, quietly. Bailey's ear twitched, but he didn't lift his head. Claire waited another 20 minutes. Then she stood slowly, set her book on the coffee table, and walked toward the stairs. Bailey watched her go. Then, after a pause, he stood, picked up the object carefully, and followed her upstairs. Not because she'd called him, not because he had to, because he'd chosen to. In the bedroom, Bailey didn't go straight to his corner. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hesitating, then walked to his bed and lay down. But this time, he didn't curl into the smallest version of himself. He stretched out, long, loose. The object was still there, tucked against his chest, but his body wasn't rigid anymore. His eyes weren't scanning for threats. He just rested. Claire lay in the dark, listening to his breathing change, slow and deep, the breath of someone who wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. She reached for David's hand. "He came to me," she whispered. "I know." "On his own." "I know." Her voice cracked. "Do you think he's starting to trust us?" David was quiet for a moment. "I think he's starting to believe we're not leaving." "Is that enough?" She thought about the weeks of silence, the slow, painful inches of progress, the moments that felt like nothing and everything at once. "Yeah," she said finally. "For now, it's enough." Week 2. The thunder came without warning. Claire was in the kitchen when she heard it, low, distant, rolling across the sky like something breaking apart. Her stomach dropped. She looked out the window. The sky had gone dark, gray clouds moving fast. Then the rain started, hard, pounding against the windows. She heard Bailey before she saw him. A whimper, high-pitched, desperate. She ran into the living room. Bailey was in the middle of the floor. His whole body was shaking. Not trembling, shaking like he was freezing to death. His teeth were chattering so loud she could hear them from across the room. The toy was pressed so tight against his face she thought he might suffocate himself with it. "Bailey," she said, kept her voice calm even though her heart was racing. "It's okay. It's just rain." Thunder cracked, loud, close. Bailey's eyes went huge, wild. He let out a sound she'd never heard from him before. A cry. Not a bark, not a whimper, a cry. It tore through her chest. Claire dropped to the floor. Hey, you're okay, I'm here. Another crack of thunder. Bailey scrambled backward, hit the wall, couldn't go any farther. His whole body convulsed. Claire crawled closer, slowly. I'm not going to touch you, she said quietly. I'm just going to be here, that's it. The storm got worse, rain hammering down, thunder rolling through like it was splitting the sky open. Each time it cracked, Bailey flinched. His breathing was ragged, panicked. Claire laid down on the floor right there beside him. It's just noise, she whispered. It can't hurt you, I promise. Bailey's eyes were locked on the toy, like if he looked at anything else, the world would fall apart. Thunder crashed again. This one felt like it shook the building. Bailey whimpered, and then something changed. He moved, not away, toward her. Just an inch, maybe two, but it was toward her. Claire's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't react, just kept lying there. Bailey inched closer. His body was still shaking, still trembling, but he was moving toward her. And then she felt it, the slightest pressure against her chest. Bailey had leaned into her, just barely, just enough that she could feel his body against hers. He was still holding the toy, still shaking, still terrified, but he was choosing her. Slowly, so slowly she was afraid to breathe, Claire wrapped her arms around him. I got you, she whispered, her voice cracked. I got you. Bailey pressed harder into her chest. His whole body shook against hers, but he didn't pull away. The storm kept going, thunder, rain, wind, but Bailey stayed. His shaking started to slow, not much, but enough. His breathing evened out, his body relaxed, just a fraction. He was still scared, but he wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time since she'd brought him home, Bailey believed it. She wasn't going to leave him. Not when he was scared, not when he was broken, not ever. They stayed on that floor for over an hour, long after the storm passed, long after the rain stopped. And when Bailey finally lifted his head, he looked at her, just once. And in that look, she saw it. Trust. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough to keep going. Week 3. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Karen had promised to send Bailey's full file once they'd had time to settle in. Claire opened it alone, David still asleep upstairs. The attachment loaded slowly. 3 documents: intake form, veterinary records, and a scanned letter. Claire started with the letter. It was handwritten, shaky script, the kind that comes from hands that hurt to move. To whoever adopts Bailey. His name is Bailey. He's 4 years old. I got him as a puppy. The toy he's holding, I gave it to him the day I brought him home. It was supposed to be a bear. He loved it so much he never put it down. I'm dying, stage 4. The doctors said 6 months. That was 8 months ago. I held on as long as I could, but I can't take care of him anymore. I can't even take care of myself. I tried to find him a home. 3 families took him. All of them brought him back. They said he was too attached to the toy, that he wouldn't let it go, that it wasn't healthy. They tried to take it away from him to help him move on, but they didn't understand. That toy is me. It's the only thing he has left that smells like me, that reminds him someone loved him once. If you take it away, you're erasing me. Please, let him keep it, however long he needs, even if it's forever. He's a good boy. He just needs someone who won't leave. I'm so sorry I had to. The letter wasn't signed, just a date, 3 months ago. Claire's hands were shaking. She scrolled to the intake notes. Owner deceased 2 weeks prior to surrender. Dog found by family member during estate clearance. Family unable to keep. 3 failed foster placements. Dog exhibits severe attachment to object belonging to deceased owner. Recommend allowing object to remain with dog indefinitely. Claire put her face in her hands. She couldn't breathe. All this time she'd been trying to understand why Bailey held that toy like his life depended on it, and now she knew, because it did. It wasn't a toy, it was proof. Proof that someone had loved him, had chosen him, had stayed with him until she physically couldn't anymore. And every person after that, every family, every foster, every well-meaning adopter had tried to take that proof away, to help him heal, to help him move on. But all they'd done was confirm what he already feared, that love doesn't last, that people leave, that holding on hurts more than letting go. David came downstairs, saw Claire at the table, shoulders shaking. What happened? She couldn't speak, just slid the laptop toward him. He read in silence. When he finished, his jaw was tight, his eyes were wet. "We tried to replace it," he said quietly. "We didn't know," Claire whispered. "We should have asked. They didn't tell us." David sat down heavily, stared at the letter on the screen. "He's not holding on to a toy," he said. "He's holding on to her." Claire nodded, couldn't speak. They sat there for a long time, the weight of it pressing down on both of them. Finally, Claire stood, walked into the living room. Bailey was on his bed, the toy between his paws, eyes half closed. She knelt down a few feet away. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry we didn't understand. I'm so sorry they tried to take her away from you." Bailey's eyes opened. "You can keep it," Claire whispered, "forever. We're not going to ask you to let go. We're not going to try to fix you. You loved her, and she loved you, and you get to keep that for as long as you need." Bailey looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time his eyes didn't look empty. They looked seen. It happened at 3 in the morning. Claire woke to the sound of nails on hardwood, clicking, back and forth, back and forth. She sat up, listened, pacing, fast, frantic, and underneath it, whimpering, soft but constant. She got out of bed, walked to the doorway. Bailey was in the hallway, walking in tight circles, eyes unfocused, the toy clamped in his mouth. He wasn't seeing the hallway, wasn't seeing her. He was somewhere else, trapped in something she couldn't see. "Bailey?" she said softly. He didn't stop, just kept pacing, circling, whimpering. His body trembled with every step. Claire had seen him scared before, seen him shake, seen him hide, but this was different. This was a breakdown. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to call his name louder, to snap him out of it, but she'd learned by now that pushing didn't work. So she walked into the hallway, sat down on the floor, right there in the middle, legs crossed, hands in her lap, and she just existed. Bailey kept pacing, walked past her, circled around, walked past her again. His breathing was fast, shallow, his whole body shook. Claire didn't move, didn't speak, just sat. Minutes passed, 5, 10, maybe more. Bailey's pacing started to slow. Not much, but enough that she noticed. He walked past her again, stopped, looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes were still wild, still scared, but there was something else there. A question, like he was asking her something he didn't have words for. Claire didn't move, just looked back at him, kept her face calm, kept her breathing steady. "I'm here," she whispered. "That's all, just here." Bailey took a step toward her, then stopped. The toy was still clamped in his mouth, his body was still trembling, but he was choosing her. For a second, Claire didn't know what to do, and then she felt it. Bailey pressed his head into her chest hard, like he was trying to bury himself in her. Claire's throat got tight, her eyes burned. She wrapped her arms around him, slow, gentle. He didn't pull away. He just stayed there, trembling in her arms, the toy still pressed between them, his breathing ragged and uneven. "You can hear me," she whispered, her voice cracked. "You can hear me. You're safe." Bailey let out a sound, not a whimper, not a cry, something in between, something that sounded like relief and heartbreak all at once. Claire held him tighter, not too tight, just enough that he'd know she wasn't letting go. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I'm not leaving, I promise." They stayed like that. She didn't know how long. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been an hour. Bailey's shaking started to slow. His breathing evened out. And then finally, his body went loose. Not tense anymore, not coiled, just resting. His head stayed pressed against her chest, the toy still there, but his jaw wasn't clenched anymore. He was holding it gently now. Claire looked down at him. His eyes were closed. His breathing was deep and steady. For the first time since she'd met him, Bailey looked like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world. He looked like he was home. She rested her chin on top of his head, closed her eyes, and whispered the words she'd been wanting to say since the day they brought him home. "You're never going to be alone again." Bailey's ear twitched, but he didn't lift his head. He just stayed, believing her. Finally, believing her. It didn't happen suddenly. There was no dramatic moment, no morning where Claire and David woke up to find the toy abandoned. It happened in pieces, so small they almost missed it. The first time was week 5. Bailey was lying on his bed, the toy between his paws. Claire was folding laundry nearby. She glanced over and noticed something different. The toy wasn't in his mouth. It was beside him, still close, still within reach, but not clenched. Claire didn't react, just kept folding. When she looked again 10 minutes later, the toy was back between his teeth. The second time was a week after that. David was at the kitchen table. Bailey had started spending mornings nearby, not for attention, just proximity. David dropped his pen. It rolled across the floor, stopped near Bailey's paw. Bailey lifted his head, looked at the pen. Then, slowly, he set the toy down, stood, sniffed the pen, picked it up gently, carried it back to David, dropped it near his chair, then returned to his spot, picked the toy back up, settled. David stared at him. "Did you just help me?" Bailey didn't respond, but the toy was back in his mouth. His eyes were already closing. The third time, Claire almost cried. It was early evening. She was on the couch. Bailey was lying near her, not touching, just close. The toy was between his paws. Her phone rang. She answered, talked for a few minutes, laughed at something her sister said. When she hung up and looked down, Bailey was watching her. Not wary, not calculating, just watching. And the toy was on the floor beside him, not in his mouth, not pressed against his chest, just there. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, wanted to acknowledge what she was seeing, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Bailey held her gaze for another moment, then lowered his head, resting his chin on his paws. The toy stayed where it was. 5 minutes passed. 10. Bailey didn't pick it back up. Claire barely moved, afraid that any shift would remind him that he'd reach for it, that the moment would end. But he didn't. He just rested, toy beside him, not required. David came home 20 minutes later, saw Bailey lying there, toy visible but not held, and froze in the doorway. Claire met his eyes, shook her head slightly. "Don't." He nodded, moved through the room carefully. When Bailey finally stood an hour later to get water, he picked the toy up again, carried it with him, set it down near the water bowl while he drank, picked it back up. But something had shifted. The toy was still important, still necessary, but it wasn't the only thing keeping him together anymore. That night, Bailey fell asleep without it in his mouth. It was tucked beside him, close enough to touch, but his jaw was relaxed, his breathing even. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what she'd witnessed. It wasn't freedom, it wasn't healing in the way people wanted to see, the dramatic before and after, the dog who finally let go and became whole. It was just a dog learning that safety didn't require armor, that holding on and letting go weren't opposites, that you could keep something close without letting it consume you. Bailey didn't stop carrying the toy. He still held it during walks, still kept it near during meals, still reached for it when the world felt uncertain. But he also started setting it down, not forever, just for moments. And those moments, small, quiet, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what they meant, were everything. Week 6. Claire came home from the store, opened the door, set the bags down. Bailey was there, not hiding, not pressed against a wall, right there at the door, waiting for her. His tail wagged, just a little, but it wagged. "Hey, buddy," she said, tried to keep her voice steady even though her chest felt like it was going to explode. Bailey stepped forward, sniffed her hand, then pressed his head against her leg. She almost cried right there in the doorway. The changes kept coming after that. Bailey started eating beside her, not across the room, right next to her. He'd sit with his bowl, glancing up every few bites like he still couldn't believe it was okay. He started sleeping on the couch, not under it, on it, sprawled out, belly up, legs in the air, completely vulnerable, completely trusting. David took a picture the first time, needed proof this was real. And then one morning, Claire woke up early, looked over at Bailey's bed in the corner. The toy was there, lying on the floor, gray, worn, falling apart, but Bailey wasn't holding it. She sat up slowly, looked around. Bailey was on the couch, curled up where David had been sleeping, head resting on the cushion, body relaxed, breathing slow and steady. He wasn't holding the toy. He didn't need it. Claire's throat got tight. She stood, walked to the couch, reached out slow, rested her hand on his back. Bailey didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just sighed, like this was the most normal thing in the world. She looked at the worn, shapeless object beside her. Her hands trembled. David saw, came into the room. "What does that mean?" "He's sharing it with us," she whispered. Not giving it away, not moving on, sharing the responsibility of keeping it safe. An hour later, Bailey stood, walked to the couch, picked the toy up gently, carried it back to his bed. But something had changed. The toy wasn't the only proof anymore. There were other things that stayed now, other constants, other reasons to believe. That evening, Claire sat on the floor near Bailey. The toy was beside him. He was resting his head on her knee. She looked at him, at the dog who'd been so broken, so scared, so convinced that love was temporary, and she realized something. He hadn't walked out of that shelter holding a toy. He'd walked out holding proof. Proof that something could stay, that not everything leaves. And when he'd finally believed that people could stay too, when he'd finally trusted that this home was permanent, he'd made room for both. The toy would always be part of him, a reminder, a testament, proof that love had existed once and could exist again. But it wasn't the only proof anymore. Now there was Claire and David and a home that didn't end. Bailey sighed, closed his eyes, the toy beside him, Claire's hand on his head, both there, both staying, and that, finally, was enough. Bailey didn't walk out holding a toy. He walked out holding proof that love doesn't have to leave. Some rescues aren't about letting go. They're about learning that holding on and moving forward aren't opposites. Subscribe if this story reminded you why we never give up. Comment if something or someone taught you that staying matters more than fixing. Thank you for watching.